Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the philosophy class. Dr. Craig is not with us this evening as he's busy with other matters, but we are doing a review of gnarled roots. I hope you will join us. For this, our study session has been rewatching the videos. I suggest rewatching them at 1.5 or faster speeds, whatever is comfortable with you. And then listen to our discussions and our talks and our questions and see if we have them right. If you have any questions yourself, feel free to leave them in the comment area of the YouTube area, and some of us might get back to you. Okay, we will be starting with Story of Creation, Part 1. Diddy, if you can give a quick review.
Okay, I don't know if it could be quick. Okay, so chapter 1 is the story of the ancients in paganism, and the text describes the structure and content uh, of the creation mythology in Athenian Greece and compares it with other Eastern forms of myth, particularly in Hebrew traditions. So it analyzes the comparative nature of Eve and Pandora, who are two very important female figures in mythologies, and examines the origin and terminology and meaning of the underlying stories of each. So it further explores the cultural shifts and changing political landscapes in the ancient Near East, particularly in Western societies like England, and how the integration of Greco-Roman classical culture created a means to signal virtue through masculine ideas. And then finally, the thesis analyzes modern cultural society and the ideas of gender-based politics. So that's kind of where we're at the moment, and it looks at Middle Eastern societies politically in the Islamic cultures and shifts that split along the gender biased lines. So anybody want to chip in any questions that anybody has, or anything that anybody thought was really stood out in that particular chapter?
Well, if no one has a question, I'll give it a few seconds. So I've got a question to get you all going. There's a common theme. So I'll give you 5-10 seconds first. Someone raise your hand if you have a question. Okay, right. The story of creation, as we addressed in the first class, there's a common theme in all the stories of creation, most of them, I believe, or in religion. Can anyone repeat to me what this common theme in the story of creation is?
Would it have to do with kind of having women be second-class citizens to men, and also being to blame in some way for the woes of society?
This actual question actually has multiple answers. So that is one of the common themes. And can you expand upon the blaming of women for all sin that certain religions tend to
okay. So like
repeat?
with Christianity, the ultimate, the original sin was Eve taking of the apple of the tree of good and not the knowledge of good and evil, which that has been taken. The context of that has been taken as that was the first sin kind of thing, because she was tempted by the serpent to do something against what she'd been told by God not to do.
Right. And the story became more blaming of Eve. Didn't that come also from Pandora? And the original story of Pandora ended up being changed. What was that? By Hesiod? I can't remember who had an issue with women and felt, and it was, I guess, what, along Greek or Roman lines, where they believed women were better not seen in public and were evil and tempestuous. And that kind of carried on into interpretations of Eve, when perhaps it was supposed to be a newer interpretation, kind of how Craig has interpreted it, to be women and men are complementary of one another. And it's a process of becoming adult, as opposed to blaming women for the problems of men, it being more divisive in gender rather than showing that we go together.
I think what
So I was just going to ask Matt a question specifically. I'm going to pick on people today, by the way. So Matt, who's normally Archie, everyone. So is it Matt or Archie?
well, my name's Matt, but I don't know, I just made up a Bitcoin pseudonym and it was Archie, so I kind of stuck with that.
Okay.
But
Okay. Matt. Matt, I'm going to give you a bit of a devil's advocate question. Why was it always men leading? You know, isn't that the greater thing that men were leading? Didn't that lead the ancients into greatness? That women were put as second place.
well, let me go back to the first question too, because I have opinions on that. What the two stories, to me, what are really common is something like a fall from grace, and then all of the evils in the world, and they're both by evil, or the vice entered the world through temptation, and like curiosity. Eve was tempted, and it was her curiosity that made her decide to eat the apple. And the same thing with Pandora. The gods instructed her not to open the box, but it was the temptation and the curiosity that got to him. So I think one of the broader themes of it is man's curiosity, man being men and women, and then it so happened to both be women, in this case, and it is the curiosity, but then that's what leads to all the ills of the world. I think in chapter 1 says all the noxious ills of the world. So, but I think kind of what Leslie was getting at the more feminine part of also what Dr. Wright, in my opinion, what he's saying is, is that necessarily a bad thing? Are you really living if you're just living and eating, then there's no challenge and there's no struggle. And if you don't die, then it's not life. I think at one point in the first couple of chapters, it's you have this dichotomy. You have to have both. So if you're in Eden and you never die, are you really living? So it's that curiosity that really makes humans humans. When you fall from grace, that's what really makes us human. And I think more now to get to your point, or your question too, is I think some of the physiological differences is what led to a lot of the gender roles too. Specifically, I think it was in one of the later chapters, but as we move from pastoral to like the city, the Greeks, and in the city affairs and the city councils, a lot of the men were the ones who did the politics. And I think part of the reason is just the difficulty of raising children, and that kind of pigeonholed women, or kind of put them in the background. And then also, it seems like some of the scholastic philosophers and these Greek philosophers used Pandora and Eve to kind of place the blame on women and say they can't be trusted because they're deceitful and treacherous. So
Okay, I'm gonna just so yeah, you covered my question perfectly. I'm actually going to put forward that men are better with women, because if there hadn't been the challenge by Eve and by Pandora, and then there would, as you said, there would be no challenge for men. Men would have just be gormless apes picking fleas off their heads, because they wouldn't know anything better, to be quite honest. So, Paul, I'm going to zero in on you. As these religions state, women are the cause of sin and such for disobeying God. But God is also apparently omniscient, so he knows everything which is going to happen. So, do you think that women in these stories, Pandora and Eve, actually disobeyed God or quietly did God's will?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it touches on free will. If God knows everything that's going to happen, and he must have known that Eve was gonna bite the apple. Does it mean we don't have a free will, or are those ideas incompatible together? And I think what Dr. Wright was arguing is that these ideas are not incompatible. We can have free will, and God can know everything everywhere. And I think I want to share a bit my personal opinion on this subject, which I've been thinking about, is that I would see the Garden of Eden like the beginning of everything, like where we were still reunited with God, and there was maybe no space, no time, or maybe it was just one time, one space where everything happened. And my my personal opinion is that Eve didn't disobey for ever, for that singular moment and singular space of ever. We actually respected. We were potentially in bliss forever, and in one place, and with all the positive ideas, all the happiness, all everything that's great. But we couldn't even kind of compare this greatness because there was no darkness. So maybe that felt dull. And after an unbounded amount of time, uh, Eve was convinced to eat that apple, which was going to happen anyway, and God knew that. But it's part of our way to learn and to actually take possession of free will. And now we've entered that era, and there will probably be an end of time where we will be reunited with God and back maybe to that state. I'm not sure. But in the meantime, it's like it will be like we have the free will to do good and do bad, and we will appreciate good because there is bad. But that doesn't mean that God wants us to do bad. It's just like a father that watches his kid fall down and maybe hurt him or herself, and learn based on those processes, and grow, and actually live and appreciate good from bad because of the experience and because of the free will that he has or she has. And so I think it's totally compatible to have free will and full knowledge of everything. And I think that well, we're living that, and I'm I'm glad to be able to take part in that learning process that we're living.
Anyone has any comments on that?
Yeah, I was going to add as well. There is this temptation to analyze all these texts in a paternalistic way, which is, I think, a pity, because I think the main point would be the exploration of freedom, of responsibility, of knowledge when taking that apple from the tree, and then the way you change that into an emasculating story where you cannot bite that apple, you cannot do this or that. It is a way to have good and bad very without no gray zones, or without any explanations of what can be fulfilling in a life, what can be rich in other than like a white and black. I mean, that it is a pity that we are analyzing some story in a simple way, not in the complex way.
Yeah, you just made me think of one other thing too, with the theme, I feel like just in general, these stories are supposed to teach us lessons. In the first chapter, I think more than the rest of them, he talks about virtue. And I think everything is a lesson learned. And one of the emphasis in the chapter is that I took from it is it's just laying out the point that there's consequences for our actions, whether we're ignorant and we do something wrong, there's consequences, or if we acquiesce to temptation and do something we know is wrong, then it's just one of the fundamental premises that is just laid out for being a human is we have free will, and then we make choices, but then there's consequences for those choices.
I have a question specifically for Leslie then. Sorry, Matt, did you want to continue?
No, that's it. That was it. And then I just want to throw in too, like, because I think one of the things from the last chapter too is, hey, what is grace? And then we have consequences in our society too. Sometimes you have a grace period, or God will have grace. Sometimes you're just lucky and don't have to face consequences. But which was one more word that he used, which makes me think of one more word that he used in this one, especially for the Greek gods. He said they're capricious. So like they're kind of unpredictable sometimes of how they're going to react to the humans' actions.
Okay, so over to Leslie. I have questions then based from what Matt and Paul have just been saying. Stories teach us lessons. There are lessons to be learned, especially from the Bible. From Pandora and Eve, what are these lessons? Is one of the lessons disobey God, or there is free will? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, with regard to free will, some, of course, believe it's incompatible, that if he intended for us to pick the apple and knew we would pick the apple, how can we have free will? But we don't have the same viewpoint as someone who is, as a being who is omniscient and can see everything from above. We can't see from that perspective, so we make decisions based on the information that we receive through living life. And we have to learn that sometimes we will make incorrect decisions, and he had to teach us that with the picking of the apple. With Pandora, it was the curiosity of opening the box prematurely. It's innocent before you know that there is a negative consequence. Up until that point, there's no knowledge of negative consequence. So there's no wrongdoing that can happen. Same goes for children. When they do something wrong before knowing it's wrong, it's a learning experience. You can't, as a parent, get angry about it. And I think that is the better perspective to have with regard to God's intention for us. And I think that's what Craig is trying to explain, is that he did his job as a parent. You have to allow your children to have exposure to things so that they can learn from it, and you can teach them, and they can grow and become adults from that.
Well said. Didi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thing I was going to chip in is I'm going to throw in a little Bible verse there from Timothy 2:13-14, because he says, "For Adam was first formed, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor." So basically, like, he's saying in this verse, because I think Craig does relate to papers written by Timothy, how Eve was deceived by the serpent and she disobeyed God's command, but God, if they say all-knowing, would know that she was going to do that. So so that states that Adam was not deceived because Adam chose to sin along with Eve, but Eve was coerced and made a mistake, and that's how that's kind of looked at. So therefore, God, being all forgiving, would forgive the transgression, forgive the sin. because she made a mistake, which was genuine, because she was tempted. But Adam didn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. So I find that kind of interesting because, you know, in that temptation and that sin, we have to remember that you're still human at the end of the day. So that's what human beings, we do. We make mistakes. So we have to be forgiven for those mistakes so that we can learn and we can flourish. And again, she was the mother of all humanity. So she is, in my view, allowed to be given a little transgression of wanting to know a bit more about life, the universe, and God, the creator. So that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's the same thing I already said too, but just to reiterate that I took the same thing Diddy was saying from what Dr. Wright put in here, that Eve being deceived was she didn't know the rules and Adam did. And those are the distinct differences, but the main takeaway from it is they both have to pay consequences. So I think just the knowledge, and that was the next point I was going to make too, is both of them have to do with knowledge, because it's the knowledge of good and evil. So when the curiosity, and then you go forward or you do something, then it's human knowledge, and then curiosity always leads people to go do new things, unknown things, and then there's consequences, and then that's what they learn. So I feel like that's what the story is. And then between Adam and Eve, Adam knowing that he shouldn't do it, but doing it anyway, and then Eve not knowing, but even if you're ignorant, there's still consequences. But then every time the curiosity leads to knowledge, even though you got to learn the hard way.
Yep. Right. There's something else I wanted to touch on as well, apart from class one. Is that another common theme from the story of creation is that very often it starts off that the predecessor is split. Like Adam has, a rib taken, women made from his ribs. In the story in the Greeks, you had the gods born from the Titans. And there's a common theme in other things that you split the first and comes forth the rest. It is my understanding that, this speaks to the duality. It speaks to the duality of humankind, and that, one becomes two, in that this actually starts with women, and from that we become two. And through the growth of multiplicity, humanity can spread. And I just to touch upon how humanity splits and grows, and through this there's learning done. And also I wanted to touch quickly upon what Matt was just saying, is that part of the lessons from the stories is to teach us to acknowledge mistakes and to accept responsibility for those mistakes. Because when we acknowledge the mistakes and accept the responsibility for them, then we can learn. And in that, I see that Adam and Eve and Pandora and the stories, and then, acknowledging actually what happened, not just turning a blind eye and away. Okay, over to you, Diddy. And can you give a brief of class 2?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to, because there's a great segue because Joel just said about Pandora. So like chapter 2, which is Athenian Greece, post of Hesiod, kind of looks more into Pandora. So it kind of the opening of the second chapter really got me, because again it's like this equality thing, which and it starts with the later Greco-Roman tradition does not think very highly of women. For instance, according to Aristotle, the father of logic, the female is female by virtue of a certain lack of qualities. I must disagree with the father of logic on that statement personally. It also says that St. Thomas Aquinas moreover declares that woman is an imperfect man. So again, we can see this theme that kind of started with blaming Eve. But this chapter specifically Craig argues that Pandora is a very complex figure who represents both good and evil, and in some versions of the myth of Pandora's box which contains all the evils of the world, while in others it contains good and bad things. So Craig also suggests that Pandora's box is like a hope of its hope is a mixed blessing, as it can both inspire and deceive. And he compares Pandora myth to other creation myths, like we just said, and argues that this is a story about the transition from a pastoral to an urban society. But we're still running along that theme, like I said, where Aristotle says that, you know, females kind of lack a certain quality. So let's go over to Leslie and see what your thoughts are on this second chapter.
Well, I guess they don't have an appreciation for emotion, perhaps, but there is value in that. I wonder, though, when I was reading this, if the lack of value they see in women, of course, they're upset about the temptation of women. They feel weak around women, but motherhood is as old as time. And as societies are being built and are growing, I wonder if there is, like I said, a lack of appreciation for something that just seems old from the pastoral days and ancient time. Women, I guess, because they have to raise children, cannot partake as readily in the creation of laws and society and structure, and they don't see the value in that or appreciate it. I don't know. What
about Paul? What do you think?
Probably they didn't appreciate the value of emotions, I guess. But I think we, by nature, we have evolved to have certain qualities. We are not exactly the same. I understand we're equal, but we have different qualities. And as we specialized, I would say maybe emotions for women and strength probably for men, it allows us to be more effective. It's pure economics, right? I specialize in one thing, you specialize in another, and both we have greater than the sum of the parts, and this is the case. Now both should recognize the value in the other. That's probably where there was some missing, or there was some flaws, maybe, I think.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting. The Greeks' word for Adam was humanity, and we talk about Zeus quite a lot, but like the Greek belief in creation and the universe is changes, that they didn't consider the universe to be infinite, and I find that quite interesting, that they wouldn't consider it to be infinite. What is infinity? What is infinite? What is an infinite universe? What is an infinite mind? Is an infinite mind the creator who made what we have? How, you know, looking the perspectives of a narrow-minded perspectives, do you think they had enough knowledge to be able to like use the technology that was around at the day to actually think that these theories and these philosophies that they had that was it, that was all encompassing, this is everything, this is what it is? Because the Greeks had a lot of different gods. So did they feel that maybe the other echelons of society wouldn't be able to understand the ferocity, the mighty majesticness of the one creator, and then had to bring that down into smaller stories so that it made it more realistic for them, because they had Zeus and they had, you know, other gods that they Poseidon, etc., that they looked on. Zeus swallowed his wife and then bore Metis out of his forehead. Are these male dominated ideas in the first place? Because this is also something that women didn't seem to write things down, but males are the ones that wrote things down. So is this where this kind of attitude started, or is this something that goes deeper, further back? I don't know. I'm just looking at
something I've mentioned in the past is that stories often, and I find the Bibles and different religions have this as well, is that they have underlying stories. And one of the things I found interesting was how the story goes with Zeus devouring his wife, is that he acquired wisdom from devouring his wife. And I feel that if you don't take the devouring as, literally eating his wife, but maybe absorbing her intelligence and listening to her, maybe, in a literal sense, it means that, or the storyteller is trying to say, if the man listens to his wife, and then he's going to get wisdom.
So eat of the words, because in the first instance, God created the word. So if you eat of the word, then you can rebirth that word from the mother as a daughter through your forehead of wisdom. In a philosophical sense.
Yeah, pretty much. You absorb the intelligence, and you're eating it. And because you've got to remember, like, language, that's one of the other important things that as this class goes on, is that language has changed and things have been translated and rewritten. And what we read today as, oh, he literally ate his wife and devoured her. To them, they might be trying to write, no, we mean he absorbed her intelligence, he listened to her, and then he became wiser. But I also think that is, and many others, is the part of the underlying stories that storytellers are trying to tell. People who actually, study the books and study the classes like this, start, looking at what is not being said exactly, reading between the lines. There's like the thing of Hermes, is part of the second class as well. That Hermes is the patron deity of thieves, but also of merchants and trade. And those kind of, are other sides of the same coin. I haven't had time to really think about what's underlined there. Maybe it's trying to say merchants are thieves, or maybe it's trying to say,
well, merchants haggle for prices for goods that they're selling, and maybe they could be a thief with the price that they're actually going to charge you for whatever it is that they're selling. So I can see where that would align quite well with a merchant being called a thief. Where did he get his merchandise from in the first place? When you look back, thieving from the earth, thieving from other people, in a sense of not giving that person a monetary or a value that was worthy of what it is that they're selling.
There's that saying, how I can't remember it exactly, one of you probably do. An honest man thinks he hasn't got a deal from a merchant unless he's managed to cheat a merchant. And it's one of those like oxymoron things where it's like, well, he's not an honest man then if he thinks he's cheating a merchant. And a merchant is supposed to make a profit. And exactly like what you're saying, how other people would consider them thieves because they're making a profit on what they're selling. But that is the whole point of being a merchant. But as we still have today, you get people coming in to merchants saying, no, I want to buy it cheaper. I want to buy it, at what you paid it for. And that's not how trade works. And the other saying, trade makes it, that's not a saying, trade makes the world go round. No, it's money makes the world go round. But trade helps. And if there's not trade, and then I mean, human expansion, there's so many times in areas past, if you study history a bit, when trade expands to like China or America and such, and then humanity expands. Very closely behind traders, you get pilgrims and migrants and everyone else, looking for a new life. And then along with that, you get an exchange of technology, an exchange of thoughts, philosophies, and sciences, and all of that follows trade. But first comes people trying to buy silk or spices or chocolate or whatever else. And it touches upon the whole Bitcoin thing of increasing trade. Trade increases the reach and expansion of humanity. But yeah, getting back to the point that Hermes maybe isn't, as you said, isn't quite an oxymoron, being the god of thieves and god of merchants, but should be seen, if it's seen in a more understanding light of, merchants should make a bit of profit. Capitalism, that's what I'm aiming at. Capitalism versus socialism. It's the socialist view. Sorry to the socialists out there, but yeah, I'm going to say that everything should be, how to put it politely, given away for free, even and such. The hardcore socialists think that, everyone goes into a pot and everyone gets everything. Whereas capitalism is, you should, people who work and try and make a profit for something should make a profit for something. Those who work harder should make more money if it'll work more technical skilled job. And that is at the root of mercantilism. I'm not saying it right. Yeah, I think that being a merchant and mercantilism is an expansion of religion and growth. And when you have merchants expanding to other areas, and then you get the expansion of religion, philosophy, stories, and growth. So I rambled on a bit there. Diddy, do you have any more points to class 2?
Well, just with the, the class of people that we're talking about that write these stories anyway, and I'm probably going to sound really tough nosy, but these are the people that were writing the stories. The people who are always write history are always the winners in history, but they're the ones that know how to use the technology. They invent technology, they invent mechanical instruments. So your normal everyday person would probably see them as fairly magical in that sense, but there's cycles and everything is like in a cycle. So to the next generation of humans, they would seem quite technologically advanced, but these things always go in cycles, and I think they would find that kind of magical. But that's just my weird mind.
I think just a couple of things on just why the stories are. I think it's all has to do with, goes back to knowledge again. And when you said like technology, even recording history or anything, the way we do it now is because of technology. And they tell the stories to pass down knowledge from generation to generation. And even most of the, before there's written language, like all these stories are so much older than when they were first written down. And there are very few people, there were like specific members of society, the poets and stuff, who would write them and pass them down. And I think everything, say like Hermes, I think to me, it seems like the Greek gods all represent something in the world. And to me, it seems like the stories have to be told in ways that can be remembered and are interesting. So I don't know if it's necessarily, to interpret them literally is as important as the underlying moral or what you learn from the story. And that's why the Greeks tell these stories to generation after generation, because it just teaches virtue or how to live. And then even, Hermes being thief, the god of the thieves and, merchants, is maybe just, again, go back to the no, men aren't perfect. Neither were any of the Greek gods. They all, were flawed as well, it seems like to me. And it's just a way of passing down knowledge. And that's even transacting as well.
I have some questions on class 2 then. Carlos, I'm going to pick on you first.
Yeah.
What does opening Pandora's box mean to you? And in that, I mean that all these evils were released and there was hope left. So what does this mean to you, and what do you think it meant to humanity? What is the story there?
Yeah, well, the story, what could it be? Like for me, it would simply mean that it was just an opportunity for growth for her, to understand the growth cycle for humanity. How I mean, how can we strive for good and find a purpose in life by opening and by being curious, by increasing your knowledge about things. And then somehow it is I mean, the way it is recounted, it is like a moral story where she didn't do what she was supposed to do, and that is so that makes me cringe in a way, thinking, oh God, why? I mean, instead of being a beautiful story where we could have creativity and something positive, and it is it becomes like a story where this is like the bad people. It happens to be a woman, and well, that's something that makes me cringe when I hear the Eve and Pandora stories as well, and how they were treated by Aristotle and all these people, as Diddy's mentioned before. That was like, oh God, like watching a film of slaves and thinking, oh God, I don't want to see them being treated so badly in my 21st century eyes, right? So it is discouraging in a way, but in a way positive, I think, in the sense that we passed that phase, and we are in a more open society where these things don't happen so much, at least.
Leslie, picking on you next. Zeus learned wisdom from women. What else do men learn from women?
Oh, what else?
I like how you start with that sigh.
Like, I need a moment to think and carefully craft this, be politically correct and diplomatic about it. No, I think we complement one another very well, and that's why we were made this way. It creates balance in that God is one, and to create Adam and Eve, he has kind of found a way for us to, I know I keep saying complement one another, but I see, it's hard to explain it. I see it a lot in marriage, where one will have one idea and bounce the ideas off of the other, and you end up coming to a better conclusion in the end when you can work it out with someone else rather than by yourself. But what I also want to say about the thing with Pandora and hope is I find hope to be incredibly crucial in all of this, and that it is what leads us when we make mistakes along the way, when we do wrong, that we will find our way and gain the knowledge to do what's right and become closer to God and ultimately get a better result in the end. I don't know if that explained men and women But give me more time on that and I'll post something in Slack, carefully crafted.
Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one. Right.
Men and women
Paul.
are both good. Just to put that out there.
Paul, once wise, sorry, Zeus, once he became wise, what do you think that Zeus brings to humanity? What comes after the wisdom? And that is after he's devoured or absorbed the knowledge from his wife. Paul.
Well, responsibility, and I guess, well, that he has to learn from hardship, from challenges that he will be facing. But I don't remember very well this part. However, what I think is that the reason why we are to learn is to explore and to be able to differentiate good from bad. There is no good if there isn't bad. So that is just part of the story.
That was a good answer, because as it's written here, it thus became through his wife that Zeus brings about good order, justice, and peace, which is the difference between good and bad. So yeah, that's pretty spot on.
Checks and balances.
Yes. There's intelligence and there's wisdom. You can have one or the other. You can have great intelligence or great wisdom, but if you have great intelligence and great wisdom, and then you have the checks and balances, and you can bring about better things.
I just wanted to bounce on, I think, what Leslie said just before, that was about hope. I did not always believe in God, but today I do. But if you have to go through life with all the hardships and challenges and tough time, and you have hope with you, whereas you could be living the exact same hardships and challenges without hope, well, that is not a life that I would wish to live. It kind of doesn't make sense. It kind of forces you to become nihilistic in a way. Nothing makes sense. I'm suffering for no reason. Everything is unfair. While keeping hope by your side kind of helps make sense of it. And it's actually very rational.
Yeah, one of my top sayings, actually, I've got two, is eternal hope and eternal vigilance. You've got to live with hope always. If you lose hope, and then living life becomes a bit pointless. And vigilance as well. You know, if you don't, how's it go again? If you don't have eternal vigilance, and then someone's going to come and steal your liberty, something along those lines. But yeah, you can't just say, yay, we're free and happy and such, and then never be vigilant, because someone will come along and trip you up and pull your legs out. Yeah. One of the things I'm not to do for relating it to Bitcoin, because I try not to, but one of the things I saw in Bitcoin early on, like over 12 years ago, was how it brings hope. Actually, I'll tell you a little story. Before I knew Bitcoin existed, back in 2009, 2010, I was in politics a little bit at just a really minor UK party, and I saw how messy and horrible it was. And really, I saw, God, this is at the really low end, terrible. And I learned some stuff about higher MPs and such. And I learned, that there's corruption here, there, and everywhere. And I think I reached a point roughly in my life then when I thought, you know what, there's no hope. There's no hope making a better world, because how? Well, what can you do? Until something significantly changes, there's no hope for it. There's no tools to bring around a better world. And then a few years later, I discovered Bitcoin in 2012, and I studied it in 2013. So it wasn't until 2013 I started really learning about its transparency, honesty, and all the things that can make it a really good tool. and then that actually gave me hope again for making a better world. And that what made me really study it really hard and learn things and really put myself out. I didn't put myself out there that much, but to start, yeah, I saw Bitcoin as the tool to give hope, and not just for me, but to humanity. But I saw it also as you can't just expect it to grow legs and do it all by itself. It needs help. You got to pick up that tool and you've got to dig in the dirt and get dirty, because there's going to be people who are going to fling mud at you, as we all know. Yeah, and also with that comes the vigilance part as well. Oh, we've got Brendan briefly joining us. He can't talk at the moment, but he is listening. Hello, Brendan, welcome. We have been running for 1 hour. Yeah, those were the eternal hope and eternal vigilance. Those two go hand in hand, in my opinion. Brendan, just for the viewers, is joining us from the UK today. He's not in Australia, and he's been doing stuff which I'm not sure if I'm not allowed to talk about or not. But glad you can join us. We have touched upon class 2. Do you want to give a quick brief of class 3, Diddy? I don't want to extend this class too long. See.
Okay, so class 3 is, well, it's chapter 3 is called Judaic, and that's it, just Judaic. We're looking at the Eve myth, which has been interpreted throughout history again, but this time typically through the Judaic kind of eyes. The Eve myth was interpreted in various different ways throughout history, but it's typically seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of disobedience and the importance of obedience to God's will. So in Judaism, the emphasis is often on the responsibility of an individual to follow God's commandments and live in accordance with divine law. In Christianity, the story of Adam and Eve is often interpreted as a prefiguration of the coming of Christ, who will redeem humanity from the effects of sin. So Judaic Christianity was a very important movement in the early development of Christianity. There is a series of books called the Midrash, and this is a complex and diverse collection of Jewish texts. Not all Midrashic stories or interpretations of Eve are positive or empowering, but some of them are. There is a particular text where in the Midrash it says that Eve denounced the beast for attacking her son Seth and for not being in subjection to those made in the image of God. The beast replied that Eve's sin had caused the animals to all revolt. However, after she greedily ate from the forbidden fruit, the nature of beasts was transformed. Whereas the Midrash contains a variety of interpretations about the stories about Eve, including her denouncing this beast for attacking Seth. So that also kind of gives a wider view of the fact that Adam and Eve were in the garden, and so was a serpent, but there were also other beasts who were named, who were around and about, and that effect also not only had an effect on humanity, but it also had an effect on the animal kingdom as well. So specifically, they were looking at Judaic views on the biblical story and their influence on the biblical stories and the Midrash. So that's what we were looking at specifically.
I'm going to put forward a couple of questions on this topic, and we're going to discuss it briefly, and then I think we'll roughly end in around 15-20 minutes, depending on how it goes. So I have a question for Matt. I'm going to pick on you. Do you believe that humanity should, from what we've been learning and studying and reading, that the right way is to completely obey God's rules blindly to the letter, or disobey God?
I've actually thought about this for a while, even before we started it. I think started class. I got a painting of Jacob. The story, if you know the story of Jacob, I don't even know it that well, so I'm gonna tell the whole story. But you know, when he tries to steal his brother's inheritance with his mom, because he's the younger brother. He's not supposed to get the inheritance. He tries to deceive his father, and then gets kicked out, and he has to go. And then I don't know, he's sleeping, he has his dream or whatever, and he's wrestling with God, or the angels. It's different one, and then he doesn't really win or lose, but that's when he gets the name Israel from. And I think it means one who wrestles with God. And then, to me, everything in life's journey is just I'm flipping through and finding the quotes, is trying to understand God's divine laws. To me, it's just everything we learn, and all these stories are what people have learned before, and all of life is just that, is we have free will, and then there's consequences, and then these stories teach virtue, and if you act in accordance with the divine laws, then it usually turns out better for you. But you can't ever know everything, so life is trying to learn and understand and act in accordance with the laws of capricious gods, or we know, but there's no way to know for sure, and there's so many variables. But and I feel like just going through this class has kind of just reinforced that even more, that my opinion on that's what these stories are about, and that's what kind of what life is.
Matt, I'd like to ask you a question related to that. It is written in the Ten Commandments, you should not steal. If I were a poor person and I was hungry, would it be okay for me to steal for food? What do you think?
I've heard about this one a lot too, and they say like, lying, you're not supposed to lie. When is it okay to lie? When a Nazi asks you if you're hiding a Jew in your attic, then the morally correct thing to do would be to lie. And then I've been asked this question a lot too, and it seems like some of what is morally right and wrong is conflicting. Sometimes it's conflicting, and then that's where judgment comes into it, and there has to be a precedent of, and then that's rational, and you have to use your rationale. In that instance, I don't know, you have to, there's so many variables, like, are you starving, and your kids, should you not steal? What is any other options you have? I guess it could be the morally right thing to do. But I think one of the problems, because we talk about the storytelling a lot, and are the stories true, is the stories we tell ourselves. Like, these might not be literal, but the morals and the consequences of what happened when whatever is to teach us a moral lesson, and then help us apply that in our judgment and in our lives. But sometimes we justify our actions when we tell ourselves a story that it's not true. Like, oh, I have to steal to feed my kid, therefore it's morally okay. And I think that's the problem I think situations are relative in life, and you have to use good judgment, and what is your justification for your actions, are they morally justifiable or not? And I think one of the problems with moral relativity, why people don't like it, is they just take the relative nature of the world, and then they make a justification for immoral actions that aren't true, and then they live their lives like that. And then that's why people who believe in deontological, like, hey, this is always the way, and there's never any reason, get upset because they so often see people try to justify immoral actions that the justifications just aren't true. So it's hard to say, but
that's good. It seems to me a lot from what you're saying that it's people trying to do actions which won't cause them sin.
Not to go on a longer rant too, but even going back to like the thief in the market and capitalism and even the sin, sometimes the it's a time horizon before the consequences happen too. Like if you steal, you know, people think capitalists are greedy because greed is a vice. A lot of socialists like to call capitalists greedy, but a real capitalist who thinks long term and is rational and logical knows it's not in their own self-interest to be greedy. If he rips off his customers or his neighbors or tries to, take more than what is earned, then over time they're going to realize that, and he's not going to get business. And that immoral action is never in his own self-interest. I think that's real capitalists think long term, and what is in one's own self-interest is always going to be the morally righteous action. And then on that word righteous, to one more, and then I'll shut up. Is I think life is a wrestling match with God, and everything you should do should be always asking God why, and a question of why, and why this and why action. So you always question God, but in the end, his laws are divine, so you don't ever question the righteousness of God. And I think I kind of got that from the Job one, right before we started this, is they say you have a relationship with God, and you're always trying to learn and question, and you wrestle with God, but in the end, like when you find his law, like you can't say, God, you're wrong, like, because that's not going to work out.
In the story of Job, that's exactly what the devil said to God. I just wanted to say it, add that in, but that's a discussion for another time. I want to ask Carlos a question now on the whether or not to obey God or disobey God, and also the moral lessons, as we were just discussing. By disobeying God's commandment, Adam and Eve introduced sin into the world and were subsequently banished from the garden. What is the lesson there that you think the story is trying to tell us?
I don't have a clear answer for that. Maybe that there were some clear rules of the game, and then there is a responsibility for disobeying those laws. I don't know. I was before I was thinking of those something that Craig wrote in this chapter about the cognitive biases that we all have, and we should all be aware of those biases, and that makes the rules of the game clearer for everyone. I mean, if you are with someone who's cheating, and I think we touched upon that in an earlier session, that if you're with someone who's cheating, I mean, you don't have the obligation to be morally right with him, and at least that is my belief. And so being aware of those cognitive biases and of those rules of the game makes you be more successful and have better outcomes for yourself and those around you. And it doesn't respond correctly to your earlier question, but to your original question, but I don't have like a good answer for that in any case.
You actually answered it perfectly, because the answer is different depending on what perspective you have, which is whether you have a Christian perspective or a Jewish perspective or Japanese perspective. Their interpretation of the story of Adam and Eve is different. Judaism sees it as the importance of obeying God. You get punished if you disobey God, whereas Christianity is a warning of dangers of temptation. And the real answer, the story underneath what it's trying to tell you, is exactly what you said. Being aware of the biases of any side or yourself may have. And if you're aware of your own biases when you're reading and learning, or even listening to someone telling you things, and then you can approach whatever it is in a better scenario, in a better situation. and you can get a better result if you are aware of your own biases and the biases around you. In that, there is more free will by being aware. This is my personal opinion. By being aware of the biases affecting you, you have more free will by acknowledging that other things are affecting you. If you're not aware of the biases and you completely say, there's nothing affecting me, I have no biases, and then someone tells you something and you act upon it thinking you are completely free of biases, and then it's more likely that you are in fact being affected by a bias and you're completely unaware of it. And your whatever results is because of this unknown bias. So yeah, you answered it perfectly, and that is pretty much what I was looking for. Brendan can't speak, unfortunately. Otherwise, we could all ask him how he's having a nice time.
No, I can speak. I'm outside.
Excellent.
So the talk, I couldn't just leave in the middle of the talk. That was the only thing. And so it went on a little bit longer than I thought it would. And so it was very interesting. So I was trying to listen in one ear and hear him in the other ear, and that wasn't working for me at all. So
do you want to tell the class what you're doing, where you are and stuff?
Oh, so I'm in the UK. I'm in Cambridge, and we're having a conference with Token of 8, and we've actually got the Bitcoin Association and N-Chain people here, and to look at how I think this is really the richest project in terms of its usage of the Bitcoin protocol in the space. And it's great to be a part of it. And so we just heard from an industry specialist, so someone not from the BSV community at all, but a trading expert, and talking about what they've been doing really over the last 10 years to bring trading into the digital realm. And I think it should be a very interesting next couple of days looking at how blockchain plays into all of that. And they've already had a couple of goes at implementing stuff on other blockchains, and some of what he had to say about that was very interesting. But basically, think of how someone might react to doing a complicated system on Ethereum and all of the bottlenecks that you would expect them to have, and that has been exactly their experience. So very good to know that, the stuff that we say about these other platforms is true. Very good to hear from such an expert and be here with such a really great group of people. So yeah, very fun few days. So I do apologize for missing the start of the class.
I have a philosophical question for you, seeing as we're on the topic and you just said some perfect stuff. So Brendan, being aware of the biases that you may have in this situation, has it helped to influence your interaction?
In what way?
Your mindfulness of, because biases can be good or bad. It's just a case of acknowledging them and being aware of that when you're explaining or discussing whatever.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I try to talk about other blockchains as little as possible. And so my bias is really that I only discuss BSV and how it can be used and why it's great and all of that sort of thing. So I would absolutely say that my bias does affect how I interact with people here. But that's just me. And I'm not worried about that.
Do you feel, yeah, well, I was just going to ask, do you feel better off for, knowing that's a bias and working on it, and, has it helped you?
Yes, definitely. And I definitely consider my words more carefully, knowing that it's a bias. And when I'm talking to people who are not also BSV people, you have to be more careful about how you explain things. You have to certainly be considerate of, I work on a few assumptions that, people who have sort of enough knowledge of crypto blockchains to be dangerous, it tends to be that you can tell how they're going to think about certain aspects of the system, how they're going to approach problem solving, how they're going to expect the solution to work. And so because it's actually totally different to what they think, you have to be very careful about how you sort of dismantle their preconditioning and set up the scaffold of really helping them understand the right way to do things. And, you know, within the Token of 8 team, that's taken several months. With these outsiders, we only have a couple of days. So the right information across to them as efficiently as possible. And yeah, that's interesting doing that. So you can't just go in and go, oh, it's wonderful and da-da-da, and just pave over everything. You've got to sort of do some construction work, you know, to, you know, put a foundation down for them.
I'll give you some context. We were just talking about the understanding of Adam and Eve and how, depending upon one's own biases, the story has different understanding. Like if you approach it from a Christian or Judaic bias, and then the moral of the story is different. And I didn't want to tell you that first of all because I wanted to hear what you said. And I think what you just said about how you explained BS3 and stuff and understanding your own bias fits perfectly into you know, philosophy in practice. Yes.
Pass the test. Yeah, no, great. Yeah. Yeah, all right. Well, I guess let's not spend too much time on what I'm doing here.
Does anyone have any input on biases, on interpreting your own biases and putting it into practice?
Well, I wasn't going to say about my own biases because I'm always open for new information that changes my attitude, but sometimes I am extremely biased. But I would like to point out that Craig does state in this chapter, for example, Genesis 3.6, it says she took of its fruit and ate, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate. So that line within itself suggests that Adam was actually with Eve at the time that she took from the tree, which in other versions it would suggest that she wasn't. So there is a bias already within what you are reading by whoever it is who is interpreting the text. So it's like he mentions that the Revised Standard Version of the New English Bible and today's English version are among those that followed the Latin Vulgate's error of not stating that Adam was with Eve in the encounter with the serpent, but the Jewish Hebrew Bible or the Greek one did establish that Adam's presence was there at the time. So I think these are kind of quite relevant to, you know, you read one text, you are biased in that way because that is what you've read and you become accustomed to those words. You read another text which is completely different, has a different meaning, you become biased in that way because of what you've actually read and written. And all I would say is that yes, what we call it now is mindfulness. So it's being mindful of what you're saying, to who you're saying, when you're saying, or of a situation and in how you interpret that situation. However, I am guilty of not doing that. And when you broke sin, like sin taking, it's about knowing what's right and wrong. So in Christianity, it was about knowing what's right and wrong, knowing you've done something wrong. But actually that has really negative connotations because you're being taught it's negative. So in Hinduism, they kind of twist it round and it's more about like a karmic relationship. So they would say that you haven't actually done something wrong. It's the right thing to do, but it might have these consequences. So I find that quite interesting in that respect. And just reiterating the fact that these were commandments that were supposed to be the law of Yahweh God, and that for us to sort of interpret as a better way of living, and to try and not disobey God. Yeah. So that's all I've got to say, really. Help humanity identify what's right and wrong.
Yeah. Being mindfulness and aware of our own biases, able to accept responsibility for our actions, knowing the difference between good and evil.
Yeah, which is literally what
or right and wrong.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people trip up because they forget about their own biases. They don't acknowledge the morality of actions. I'm not too agreeing on that. Blind disobedience is the way, because as the story of Eve and Pandora teaches us, that the disobedience that they had actually stimulated humanity to growth. And if they hadn't been blindly obedient, sorry, if they had been, and then they, wouldn't have opened the box or eaten the apple and such. And to me, it slightly teaches us as the story that sometimes to grow, we can't stay the same always. We've got to break the rules slightly. We've got to bend the rules. But I also do agree with Matt's explanation of there is a divine plan, and trying to live to the divine plan can be more spiritually and morally fruitful. But along the path, there's opportunities to disobey, and when we disobey, sometimes, like Leslie said, as children, we learn, and it's a lot of, we can learn other ways, but sometimes a lot of times we disobey to learn, and those lessons are quicker, and sometimes you can only learn lessons if you disobey, and that is the way of things. But so
I was going to say, isn't that how you create a more open society? Like, because then that raises,
It's been interesting reading the Summa Theologica, and the section that I'm up to, he is talking about how law enables us to create a system that defines the morality that we will apply across society, and how punishment is kind of the means by which we get people to change their behavior. And so there has to be punishment. You have to have that negative response to negative action to push things towards the higher virtue outcome, basically. Yeah. So you want to be always pushing people towards acting more in the common good, and punishment is a big means by which you can incentivize. But people know that if they do something, it will have a bad outcome for them, they're less likely to do that.
Yeah.
He hasn't yet talked about how a positive incentive can also create that behavior. But I expect that's actually what's next.
I'm just going to chip in another Bible quote, right? This is Romans 3:23-24. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Jesus Christ. So we all know what happened to Jesus. Ultimately, Jesus died on the cross for our sins. So there is a visual image there of how bad it could really get if you don't pay attention to God's laws, because he sacrificed his own son for our sins to show us what he's prepared to do for humanity.
I think with that, that's a good point to end the class, because then we can bring that point up next time and discuss, the story there of Jesus and the crucifixion. And is there an underlying story? Is there not? Is it just a thing which happened? Or is there a deep spiritual meaning, or a meaning of obeying God or disobeying God? I think that story can be quite extrapolated upon. Okay, everyone, I'm going to thank you all for today's class.